okay? And no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm back tan, rested, and ready after an election that took place in the great state of Maryland this past Tuesday. And I was part of that election cycle. I'm very happy to say that I was indeed reelected. As I've told you before many times in this podcast, I rarely talk about the fact that I am an elected official in Maryland, but I did have a primary, and it was a very interesting one, which I might talk about later. It just depends. But in the meantime, this podcast is titled, Is He Okay? Guess who we are talking about? Joe Biden, of course. He's the he. Or does he go by he? I'm not really sure, Chris. It could be any pronoun, they, their, them. Well, is Biden okay? So there is this really interesting exchange on Capitol Hill that happened this week where Congressman Troy Nehls, who's a Republican of Texas, asks Joe Biden asks Pete Buttigieg a series of questions, and Pete Buttigieg answers with a really strange, as he usually would answer, with a strange way about him concerning Joe Biden's mental fitness. So here's what Representative Nehls of Texas asked. It was just like, hey, is the president okay? I mean, he seems to be having a lot of issues, and they seem to be cognitive issues. And this was on the House Transportation Committee hearing. And Representative Troy Nehls just wanted to ask the question of Pete Buttigieg, who is the Secretary of Transportation. We have this approximately 1 minute exchange. And that 1 minute exchange is between Nehls and Buttigieg. You're going to find this really interesting because haven't you asked yourself the same question? Is Joe Biden okay? Is he up to the job? Is he really in command? Who's calling the shots? Does he have an earpiece and someone's telling him what to say? I mean, sometimes it does make you wonder. We have that exchange between these two individuals, and here it is.
President Biden's mental state, and for good reason. Sadly, he shakes hands with ghosts and imaginary people. He falls off bicycles. Even at the White House Easter celebration, the Easter Bunny had to guide him back into his safe place. Cue cards that say, sit here, or end of speech, which he actually states, that is, if he stays awake. So my question for you is, sir, have you spoken with any other cabinet members about implementing the 25th Amendment on President Biden?
First of all, I'm glad to have a president who can ride a bicycle. And
that's your
I
question.
will look beyond the insulting nature of that question and make clear to you that the President of the United States...
Have you spoken to any other cabinet members about implementing the 25th Amendment on President Biden?
Of course not.
Please allow the witness to answer.
Have you emailed, this is my time, have you emailed any members with the executive branch about the president's health or cognitive decline, including text messages from your private phone?
Boss as I have ever had the pleasure of working with.
What about political appointees at USDOT? Have you spoken about...
Gentleman's time has expired.
I couldn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Well,
you yield me 1 minute, sir?
Absolutely not. If you had yielded the secretary some time to actually answer the ridiculous question, you might have actually gotten something.
So any normal person in any normally functioning democracy would actually want to know the answer to those questions. Namely, Mr. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, do you think that the President of the United States is in command of his office? Is he capable of functioning as President of the United States? Is he able to do the job? Are you confident in his leadership to do the job and in his competence and in his cognitive ability? That is a perfectly reasonable question to ask based on all of the stuff that we've seen. And in fact, Representative Nehls even said, well, at one point, the President of the United States was shaking hands with an invisible person. Another instance, the President of the United States during Easter had the Easter bunny showing him where he was supposed to go. It was probably a staffer dressed as the Easter bunny, and the staffer was probably telling the president, hey, Mr. President, you're supposed to go over here next. And of course, the Easter bunny doesn't have his mouth moving, so no one could actually see who was inside that costume or what they were saying. Perfectly reasonable. And so what does Pete Buttigieg say? What is his response? Well, I'm glad that we have a president who can ride a bicycle. Because as you know, the president fell off of his bicycle because he forgot to put his foot down when he stopped. And when you stop riding your bicycle, of course, you will fall directly sideways unless you put your foot down. I mean, kind of common sense. But if you are in cognitive decline, the fact of the matter is that you might forget to put your foot down, which is probably what is happening with Joe Biden. And so Troy Nell says, what about the bicycle thing? Pete Buttigieg, I'm glad to have a president who can ride a bicycle. Well, that's when Congressman Nels should have said, well, yeah, I'm proud to have a Secretary of Transportation whose husband can have a baby. Because that's what they're suggesting. And this is what happens when you live in this parallel universe of they, their, them, and a president of the United States who's not in charge. I mean, the Obama people are in charge. The president is not cognitively able to perform his duties, and a Secretary of Transportation who thinks that men can have babies, and whose husband, according to him, had twins as they were sitting in their hospital bed together, holding the twin babies. Well, you have the Democrat who is the chair of the Transportation Committee, right? The congressman who's ahead of the Transportation Committee, who won't allow Representative Nels of Texas to continue his questioning or his line of questioning. And so this goes back to the original question. Why wouldn't all of us want to know the answer from the cabinet secretaries and to the simple question is President Biden okay? Is he up to the job? Why wouldn't you just want to have a hearing and just ask the questions of the secretaries and all the cabinets? Because they allegedly interact with the president of the United States relatively frequently, one would think. I mean, maybe not. Maybe it's the Obama people that's interacting with the secretaries. But wouldn't you want to know the question? But of course, in modern America, we don't really want a government that functions anymore. At least that's what the Democrats are kind of telling us. It's okay. It's okay to have a president who doesn't know what he's doing or where he is, or whether he's shaking hands with a person or not. I mean, who knows? But I love that. I'm glad to have a president who can ride a bicycle. I mean, talk about virtue signaling. So the president of the United States doesn't know where he is, so the Easter Bunny shows him where to go. The president of the United States doesn't know that there is someone next to him he's supposed to shake his hand, so he shakes hand with the air and acts like it's real. The president of the United States reads from a script that certainly appears as though he is being told what to say in an earpiece. At least that's the way I see it. And yet Pete Buttigieg's biggest concern is, well, he knows how to ride a bicycle. That's what really matters. Oh, yeah? Well, why doesn't he get on his bicycle and ride down the streets of Washington, D.C.? We'll see how long that lasts, because he'll probably get shot in Washington, D.C. It's that fundamentally unsafe. I mean, you walk out the White House, you walk a couple of blocks, it's not safe. It's not. Certainly, after dark in that area, it's not safe at all. And, even on weekends, certain weekends, I mean, when you don't have a lot of tourists downtown, it's fundamentally unsafe. So, yeah, hey, have the president ride his bicycle instead of in Delaware and Bethany Beach, where all the rich and famous live. Why not have him go down to D.C. and ride his bicycle? Well, in a normally functioning democracy, Representative Troy Nels would have been able to answer that or ask that question, and Pete Buttigieg would have had an opportunity to properly answer it. And we could all then listen about how absurdly stupid this administration is and how absurdly stupid all of their transportation secretaries are as well. And so we have to continue pushing this. As far as I'm concerned, we should be pushing this question to Democrats. Are you okay with a president who is not really, truly up to the job because he doesn't really know where he is? Are you okay with someone other than the president or vice president having the nuclear codes? Because that's really where this is. You go to the president of the United States, you say, hey, Mr. President, China has launched a preemptive attack on Taiwan. So who's in charge? Will he even know what to do? It's like, well, let's ask Hunter Biden. Maybe he'll know what to do. He can call up Xi and find out if they can do a deal, They can sell out the rest of our country. So please, ladies and gentlemen, please write to Congressman Troy Nehls. I think that would be a really cool thing. And ask him to continue to push this issue of whether President Biden is up to the job, because he's the first person I've really heard in a hearing environment who has actually pushed the question forward and continue to follow up about what about all of these really weird things that Biden's doing? And do you think that that's normal for a president of the United States to do those things if he's really in command and he really has all of his faculties? So next up, podcast listeners, Dana Carvey makes fun of Joe Biden. So look, Joe Biden is the source of many jokes across America. Some of them about how he's kind of out of it, which of course he is. Others just make fun of the fact that he keeps doing blunders and just does one dumb thing after another. Others with his policies, of course. What I love about Dana Carvey is Dana Carvey as a comedian used to make fun of George Bush Sr. When Dana Carvey was on Saturday Night Live, he made fun of the older George Bush, who of course is now deceased. And it was hysterically funny. I mean, I used to laugh so hard, and it was great comedy. So now Dana Carvey is going and making fun of a Democrat. And as you can imagine, it'll be a very short cycle before people start to try to cancel Dana Carvey. So far, I haven't heard anyone trying to do that, but we have a pretty funny clip of Dana Carvey making fun of Joe Biden, and here it is.
But Biden came out as a really sleepy, sweet grandpa, and he was like, he's always repeating this story, Yeah, I went to Scranton. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. My dad lost his job. No joke. I'm not kidding around here. No human being in the world thinks that's a joke. Nobody. Is anybody that lost his job? And then, my dad didn't even do the number thing. Number one, the one part. Number two, what the guy said. Number three, you know the drill. Come on. No, we don't. Now what he does is he kind of whispers and then he yells. If you know, I think it's a wonderful move. Don't you love it when he's like, we know how to get natural gas. Because we can get it. We know how to get it. That's what we do. We gave the people the public, the pirates of the Caribbean.
I mean, only Dana Carvey can get away with, I think, humor like that, because I really haven't heard another comedian kind of make fun of Biden in that way, where it's just genuinely funny. It's also reflecting real life, too, at the same time, because it makes you question whether or not this guy is all there. And at the same time, you just say, wow, that's Dana Carvey. Just seems non-threatening. But I'm sure it's only a matter of time before the left tries to cancel Dana Carvey, too. But great job, Dana Carvey, in kind of reminding us that we need to be able to laugh at ourselves. We need to be able to laugh at the President of the United States, of course. He is laughable. And Dana Carvey did the same thing to Republicans, ladies and gentlemen. And that was back during a time when Saturday Night Live, back in the early 90s, would actually make fun of Republicans and Democrats alike. But that doesn't happen anymore. So Dana Carvey, and this is, of course, a recent comedy skit that he made fun of Biden, is just something that can only happen today when you are on your own. You could never be part of NBC on Saturday Night Live and actually get away with saying that, because they would cut that segment out of Saturday Night Live. It's like, Well, why didn't you play my segment, NBC? Well, it's because it's making fun of President Biden, and we don't want people to lose any more confidence in him than we already have, because we know that he's losing his mind, but we don't want to remind them that he's losing his mind. So way to go, Dana Carvey. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Resetting Cash. This is actually a very interesting segment, Resetting Cash, because there's this trend in the United States and across the actual democracies and modern economies, where the economies and the leadership want to get rid of cash. They want you to use only a digital wallet. They want you to only use digital cash. I'm not talking about crypto, okay? I'm just talking about converting dollars to a digital wallet, which, by the way, is huge with millennials, Chris. But get this. There are a lot of problems, as we've talked about before, with the idea of having a digital wallet. Namely, that the money could just disappear if it's digital, okay? What if the government became authoritarian, which, some might argue has already happened, and the government decides that anyone with a gun needs to turn in their gun or we're going to wipe out your digital wallet. Well, you know what they can't wipe out? They can't wipe out your actual cash, okay? Could they wipe out the cash that you have in the bank? Yes, they could. I'm talking about, though, cash that you actually have in your safe or at home or in your business or in your cash register or wherever you put it and hide it. And why does this matter? This matters because recently, and this is reported in a number of newspapers, including the Epoch Times, a woman was hospitalized with an accidental overdose after picking up a $1 bill in Tennessee. So a Kentucky woman said she ended up in the hospital with an accidental overdose after she picked up a simple $1 bill on the ground. Quote, "My body went completely numb. I could barely talk and I could barely breathe," Renee Parsons wrote on Facebook, claiming she actually overdosed. Parsons' family was traveling to a Dallas area conference when she stopped at McDonald's in Bellevue, Tennessee. Renee then spotted a dollar bill on the ground and attempted to collect it. I mean, you and I would probably do the same. Her husband, Justin Parsons, told the local media the story. "I see a dollar bill on the ground, thinking absolutely nothing of it, picked it up," Renee wrote on Facebook. Then, within minutes, her body went numb and she could barely move or breathe. It's almost like a burning sensation, if you will, that starts here at your shoulders and then goes down because it's almost like it's numbing your entire body, she said. Justin told local news station 2 that she looked like she was dying, and she was certainly as very unconscious and pale as you can imagine. After she was taken to a nearby hospital, staff treated her for an accidental drug overdose before she was released 4 hours later. The couple told local outlets that her toxicology report did not test positive for synthetic drugs, but they said they're confident the dollar bill contained fentanyl or another powerful drug that could not be identified. However, the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department said that they did not find traces of synthetic drugs on the dollar bill, but they destroyed it anyway, according to local media. Dr. Rebecca Donald, an assistant professor of anesthesiology and pain medicine at Vanderbilt University, told WSMV-TV that it was not likely fentanyl. It is much more likely for her to have a reaction if she had inadvertently rubbed her nose and exposed that drug to some of the blood vessels in her nose, or licked her fingers or rubbed her eyes, she said. Dr. David Edwards, another Vanderbilt doctor, told News 19 that simply touching most drugs cannot cause an overdose. Interesting. I've heard the opposite. Ingesting something is a different story than touching something. So in June, the Perry County Sheriff's Office issued a warning after fentanyl-laced cash was found at 2 different gas stations in Tennessee. So it's interesting. You have some doctors that they've interviewed that's saying, "Oh, no, that can't happen." But meanwhile, when you talk to the police officers, they're like, "Yeah, it happens and is happening." And so, ladies and gentlemen, here is where we're going with this. The United States government is allowing people to illegally cross the border, and they're clearly illegally crossing the border with fentanyl and all other kinds of drugs. And we have a porous border, and we have all these different drugs coming through, including the most dangerous, such as fentanyl. And then suddenly, we have people dropping dead left and right from these drugs. And then the next thing we know, a dollar bill has fentanyl on it and could potentially kill you. I mean, think about it for a moment. Let's just say the dollar bill was loaded with fentanyl, or a dollar bill was loaded with fentanyl. You saw it on the ground, you picked it up, and you do what we all do. You probably looked at it and rolled it out completely and said, wow, that's a real dollar bill, and I'm going to put it in my wallet. So you put it in your wallet. You now have the fentanyl all over your fingertips, and at some point that day, you're probably going to eat. Or you might sneeze, or you might rub your nose. And now you have fentanyl in your body, which my understanding is could be sufficient enough to kill you. Well, our federal government has enabled this nonsense to happen. And because they've allowed the fentanyl to come across the border. But what if, and I put this out there, and this is, I will grant you, this is kind of far out there. What if there are people across the planet, like the Chinese government, the communists, and maybe Cuba, and maybe Venezuela, maybe North Korea, that are trying to undermine the United States currency and the use of it? What if? Well, then you suddenly have this issue of people being terrified of using dollar bills or $20 bills or any kind of paper currency because it has been laced with fentanyl in certain parts of the country, and maybe that could even be expanded by these criminals and by these foreign criminals as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this is entirely possible, okay? It's entirely possible. So then you might say to yourself, well, what benefit would this be to the Chinese? Very easily. It's a very easy benefit because the dollar is the world's currency. People across the planet in the most far-ranging places of the planet use dollar bills, use American currency to pay for things because it's a hard currency. What if suddenly everybody was afraid to use it because they had heard stories across the planet of people dropping dead because they touched the dollar bills, which could have been laced with fentanyl or something even worse? Well, then that would give the United States government the justification to implement a completely and thorough digital currency. And what could go wrong, ladies and gentlemen, with a digital currency? Well, pretty much everything can go wrong with a digital currency. For example, we gave the earlier example, of course, about the fact that government could just wipe out your account. The bank could wipe out your account. Has anyone out there in podcast land had their checking account frozen? Okay. A checking account can be frozen in the United States if someone puts a lien on your account because, let's say, you didn't pay a bill and they got a judgment against you. In many cases, that could have happened because you simply didn't have the money to pay the bill. And suddenly, your account is frozen, which means you can't use your money. Yes, you owed money to someone. I get it, right? I get it. But if that happened to you before, or if you can imagine that happening to you, then I will say this. You feel powerless because now you realize you can't buy anything. Have you ever had someone compromise your credit card and you're away on vacation and suddenly you can't use any of your credit cards? And you're like, well, what am I supposed to use now? I don't have enough cash on me. I've got like $100, but that's not going to get me very far for very long. Well, all of those examples that I just gave are identical to digital cash because digital cash, where you have a digital wallet and that digital wallet is controlled by the federal government, because obviously it would be, it can be easily wiped out and taken away. Just like a credit card can be compromised and suddenly made useless. Exactly like that. And just like you never thought that you'd have a federal government that would tell you that the age of the Enlightenment is over and that men can be women and women can be men and that men can have babies, that's the same government that, believe you me, can take away your digital cash if you don't basically get on your knees and ask for forgiveness to that federal government. And that's why I'm so concerned about this trend and in the Epoch Times article, namely that we have governments that are across the planet who want to displace the dollar bill and the American currency as the default currency and the hard currency on the planet. And one way of doing that is to lace it with fentanyl and to make it dangerous to use the currency and dangerous to exchange the currency. And then we also have a willing administration, namely the Biden administration, who would be more than happy to control every aspect of your life by making you have digital currency. And I don't know about you guys, but I enjoy having a few dollars in my pocket. You know, it's in my wallet, I guess. Yes, I've got a couple of credit cards naturally, and I'm just like many people who pay for things with credit cards predominantly because you get the points and all that stuff, and that makes sense. But there is something very empowering about having cash. Because if you ever notice, people tend to jump more at cash, especially when you are paying people. I know in case of my family, if you if you give a niece or a nephew cash, like it's really kind of interesting. So I have nieces and nephews, and over the years, traditionally we would give just a check, right? For a birthday or for Christmas or something like that. If it was a really special occasion, like a high school graduation, as an example, we would give like $100, okay? And we would write a check. And a couple of times we simply forgot to write the check in time after we left the house. And we're like, oh man, I hope we have enough cash. And my wife has a tendency of carrying more cash than me. I think she just always has. And so we put a $100 bill inside the card as opposed to a check for $100. And you should have seen the difference. It was like we gave them $500 because it's like, yeah, that check thing is one extra thing I got to take care of. But the cash is like instant. It's something that you can use today. It's transferable this second anywhere. Anyone will accept it. So why would the government want to get rid of it? And we've briefly touched on this subject before, but what has changed between that last conversation and today's is the idea that a simple terrorist event or a simple accidental event by allowing these idiots with fentanyl to come across the border, okay? I'm talking about the drug smugglers to come across the borders of the United States with fentanyl and other drugs and lacing our currency and making it impossible for us to use our own currency in our own country. And then the government says, well, we're going to sign an executive order, and it's an emergency order where you have to digitize all of your cash from this point forward. And if you don't turn in all of your cash effectively by Friday, and you turn it into the bank, who will then turn it into digital cash, if you don't do that, then the cash will become worthless because we are having an emergency where people are using cash and touching it and dying from fentanyl overdoses. Do you think that that's not possible? Of course it's possible. Of course it is. And I'm sure you're probably saying, oh, well, Mark, I have total confidence in the federal government to make sure that the system is fair and no one can, the government will always leave you alone. Well, how about if someone hacks it? How about that? Right? if they're smart enough to kill our cash economy with fentanyl, aren't these same people smart enough to start hacking your digital wallet? I mean, couldn't that happen as well? Isn't that the whole point of having cash as a backstop to the digital wallet being messed up or to the banking system breaking down or collapsing or something? Who knows? So this is an important story for all of those reasons. And it's interesting how so many stories like this are just buried and they're like, yeah, it's just a one and done incident. But don't you think for 1 minute that people in the Mexican cartels and in China, the CCP and others are looking at us going, if we could figure out a way of putting fentanyl on American dollars as they find their way across the planet and people start dropping dead, they're going to stop using American dollars. Pretty simple, huh? Pretty interesting. And we could literally destroy the United States economy in the process, but more importantly to them, they could destroy our freedoms. And there's nothing more free than having cash in your wallet because it is recognizable and people jump at that cash much faster than they jump at credit cards or checks, because with credit cards, they have to pay a fee when they accept the credit card. Usually it's like 1% to 3%. I'm talking about the merchant, right? So if I'm a merchant, put yourself in this situation, Chris. Here we go. We got Chris here. So Chris, if you have a store and the store sells shoes, okay? You have a high-end shoe store. You own the store and you accept all the credit cards. Most, it's like 90% of the people come in and they pay using a credit card. You have to pay the credit card company a percentage of that sale for the luxury and benefit of using their credit card system. So that comes right off of the top. It's 1% to 3%. It might even be more. I'm not really certain at the moment. Depends on your volume. Maybe you can negotiate a better deal, but it's not going to be less than 1%. Probably much more like 3%. It's your store. You're the guy at the register like 90% of the time. Then someone comes in and they hand you a $100 bill or $200 bills, two $100 bills. Which one's more attractive to the store owner?
The cash.
The cash. The cash. Exactly. And cash is used even more widely by those who are the least among us, the poor, because they don't have bank accounts, because they don't have digital wallets. They buy everything with cash. And so this would literally collapse our economy, ladies and gentlemen. And we cannot afford for that to happen. So I'm just hoping that someone is watching this and taking this really seriously in the Biden administration. But then again, it is the Biden administration that's allowing all the fentanyl to cross the border with all these folks who are illegally coming across the border. It is the Biden administration that is letting people out on basically no bail or a little bit of bail. I mean, it's just like a revolving door when they get arrested for these kinds of drug crimes and worse. And so what is the teaching moment then? Why wouldn't the rest of the world try to supplant us? Because that doesn't make us stronger. Makes us so much weaker. So speaking of cash, ladies and gentlemen, is China short on cash? So get this. China's banking system is short on cash, according to Gordon Chang. China is going through a systemic debt crisis because of a lack of liquidity, according to China expert and author Gordon Chang. In comments to NTD, the sister media outlet of the Epoch Times, he noted that 400,000 depositors reported recently were allowed by some banks in China's Henan province to withdraw money. So let's say this again. 400,000 depositors in the Henan province in China were not allowed by some banks in China to withdraw their money. The Communist Party right now has no economic answers, Gordon Chang said. The country as a whole is in too much debt, and so this is an issue going forward. Chang pointed to a similar situation that occurred in Shanghai. Shanghai banks have severe restrictions in the amount of withdrawals. So you have your money in the bank, and you're prohibited from taking your money out of the bank. Think about that. It's technically not a default in a sense, but people are not able to get access to their own money, Chang said. There's just not enough liquidity in the Chinese banking system, and this is not just in some faraway province. This is across the Chinese banking system. Chang said protests have taken place in front of the People's Bank of China of Hainan, which is the central bank, instead of at the region's rural banks where funds have been frozen by the state since April. So people understand that the crisis is not just any one institution, it's a crisis which is systemic, he said. Chang noted that the debt crisis extends to other parts of the economy, citing the defaults of several large property companies. Evergrande, for instance, which is a huge developer, had something like $305 billion in obligations. Think about that, $305 billion in obligations. The other big property developers like Evergrande, although not nearly as indebted, basically can't pay back their debts anyway. Chang says the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, doesn't have any viable way to handle its huge debts. I suppose they could print money, but China already has an inflation problem. So that's not going to be a long-term solution, he said. In Chang's opinion, the regime has faced this financial issue for some time. It has been masked because the Communist Party has been able to obtain money from the outside. It's been masked because they've incurred debt, he said. But now they are running out of room for what to do. In other words, the Chinese Communist Party has been borrowing money or has had money coming into the country, an inflow of cash to invest in development projects. And so that foreign money coming in, investing in development projects in China, as well as other projects, that's now dried up. So as a result, these buildings, many of which are empty, are having to start to repay their debts, and there isn't the money to do so. So the banks who lent them the money are finding that they're running out of cash because they use the depositors' cash, right? The money that you put in the bank to save, they're using that money to lend to the developers, which is pretty standard, by the way. The only problem is they made these risky bets and now they're not being paid back. So there isn't enough money in the bank, meaning that your money that you put in the bank isn't all there. Chang believes that it could trigger the failure of the CCP because the Communist Party can't come up with solutions that would save it. He pointed to police violence against the depositors in Hainan, saying, "It's rooted in the ideology of the CCP. This is the typical playbook of the Chinese Communist Party. To intimidate, to use force," Chang said. The party line is that this money is not yours. It's our money, and we're going to do what we want with it. So why does this matter, ladies and gentlemen? It matters for a variety of reasons, and they're all really important. It matters, number one, because that when a communist party, which is a de facto dictatorship under Xi, starts to have an economy that is running out of cash, that means they become desperate. And when they become desperate, they become dangerous. Not just to people that live there, but they become dangerous to their neighbors. And if you're looking across the Taiwan Straits and you see a country that's very wealthy, that's flush with cash, you might want to invade because you need the cash. It's not even because you want the territory. It's not even because of ego anymore. It's because you're trying to survive as the CCP. So countries, when they start to fail, especially countries run by dictators, communists, they become very afraid because they know if they don't do something, there could be a revolution and they will be the first to be shot. So they look for solutions, and one solution is invade Taiwan and steal their money. Okay? Well, ladies and gentlemen, their other solution is to say, you know that money that you worked for your whole life that's in the bank that you deposited in there that you think is safe? We're not going to let you take it out. And that's why I don't like getting rid of cash, paper currency. Because any economy that gets rid of paper currency, that has a government that spends too much money or mismanages the economy, Joe Biden, could one day say, you know what we're going to do? There is no longer enough cash in the system. So therefore, we're going to, take your money out of the bank. It's now ours. It's ours. And by the way, since it's all digital now, it's not there. Your balance is zero. You've got nothing. Good luck. It's that simple for a government to do if it really wants to take over the economy and it really wants to become an authoritarian dictatorship type government. And in China, we're seeing what that looks like. Okay, we're seeing mismanaged economy. Okay, steal people's deposits. In the United States, we're seeing a mismanaged economy, inflation, and a government that is still spending out of control, and the danger of getting rid of paper currency, okay, which is, we've explained what that's all about. So we should look to our communist countries overseas and look at what not to do. Because obviously in communist China, you can't own your own weapon. So you can't protest against the government. You can't try to overthrow the government because the government has all the guns and the people don't. And so you really don't have a government that fears the people and fears the will of the people. You just have one-way control. And so I find this really interesting that we started this conversation out about how there's fentanyl that's being found on some currency across America, certainly the most recent story in Tennessee, and we've heard this story before. And the idea that if this were to become more widespread, then potentially the United States government could say, let's just get rid of paper currency altogether and coins and so forth, and everything must be digital. And I know for a fact, Chris, that millennials are like, yeah, that's cool. Who cares? I only pay for everything with Venmo and all that stuff and Apple Pay. And why would I really need anything that's really cash? And that because you do, because you must fundamentally not trust your government. It is a uniquely American feeling, a uniquely American character trait, a good character trait to not trust government.
It was founded on not trusting government.
We were founded on not trusting government. That's why we have the Second Amendment. That's why we have the First Amendment. And the Second Amendment protects the First Amendment and all the other amendments and all of the rest of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Because of this very thing. Because what better way to control people than to control their health care and to control their wallets, their digital wallets? There is no better way, and China, ladies and gentlemen, should be very, very informative to the American people of what can happen when a government mismanages the economy and then decides to steal your cash to keep the government afloat. So next up, podcast listeners, Ron DeSantis is winning on education. This is important because Governor DeSantis is not just winning on the issue of education, obviously with conservatives, we all know that. But guess what? He's winning on education with many Democrats and swing Democrats, as well as unaffiliated voters as well. So in the Daily Wire, DeSantis dominates Trump in fundraising as 2024 hopes surge. The teachers union admits DeSantis beats the teachers union on education in the swing states. Think about that. This is epic. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis shows no signs of slowing down amid his meteoric rise to the top of the Republican Party as he beat former President Donald Trump in fundraising by nearly 8 figures in the first half of this year. Trump's fundraising slowed during the first half of 2022 to only $36 million, the first 6-month period since leaving office where he failed to raise $50 million during that span of time. DeSantis raised $45 million during the same period of time, $9 million than the former president. In April, DeSantis had already raised more than $100 million for his re-election bid as governor of Florida, which CNN noted might have made him perhaps the first gubernatorial candidate in history to reach the 9-figure milestone through donations. The CNN report noted that not only does the staggering sum send a strong message to Democrats in the state, but it also puts other Republicans aiming to potentially run in 2024 on notice. NBC News reports that DeSantis now sits on an unprecedented $130 million war chest. It's incredible. DeSantis has also recently been touted as presidential candidate by podcast giant Joe Rogan and entrepreneur Elon Musk. Musk, who has stated that it's time for Trump to retire for a variety of reasons, said that if DeSantis runs against Biden in 2024, then DeSantis will easily win. He doesn't even need to campaign, Musk said. Former Wisconsin Republican Governor Scott Walker said that DeSantis was a frequent topic of conversation during a recent cruise ship trip with other conservatives. Quote, "The name I hear most frequently talking to people is Ron DeSantis," Walker said. "What they said to me all the time is they feel like DeSantis has the kind of guts, the same kind of backbone as Trump, but his newer, younger, fresher version. That's what I hear repeatedly." Peter Fearman, a Republican member of the National Committee of Republicans from Florida, said that DeSantis has more appeal with Republican voters than any other Republican he's ever seen, including former Governor Jeb Bush and Rick Scott. "I've never seen someone more popular with Republicans," he said. "It is just amazing." DeSantis manages to win on issues that Republicans have long struggled on. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is the meat and potatoes of this article. Obviously, what you see here is two candidates who are jockeying for position, not just for president, but for control of the Republican Party. And that would be Donald Trump and DeSantis. But here's the thing. DeSantis manages to win on issues that the Republicans themselves have long struggled on, including education. And that's according to a recent poll conducted by a teachers union that absolutely hates DeSantis. NBC News reported, and this was hard for NBC News, they reported that the poll from the American Federation of Teachers, conducted by the Democrat firm Hart Research, found that swing state voters approve of Governor DeSantis' positions and his rhetoric, and that DeSantis was smart about where he draws the line on public education and private education. So in other words, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest single issue that Democrats often win on, especially with suburban moms, which are true swing voters and oftentimes determine national elections as well as congressional elections and senatorial elections, those suburban moms believe that DeSantis is right on point when it comes to education. And that means that the Republicans are not just winning on the most, I'd say, divided issue of the day when it comes to Democrats and how they're able to divide and pull people away and say, yeah, it's just Republicans. They don't care about you. They don't care about public education. They only care about themselves. And now you have these same individuals saying, yeah, you know what? Actually, Governor DeSantis is right on point, and I prefer Republican when it comes to his policies or her policies on educating my children. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the biggest single takeaway from this article. And let me tell you something. If that holds, if that continues, if Republicans continue to talk about educational issues and continue to push school choice and continue to talk about the fact that public education is a monopoly and monopolies are bad and that we should have basically educational freedom and educational competition, then we will win every single state in America. I am convinced of it. And that is the last word on Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, Truth Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.